The last few years I've read some interesting books, true stories from former sister wives, women who escaped from polygamous marriages. Two of these women were in these cults during the era of Warren Jeffs, and the first one I highly recommend. It's called Escape by Carolyn Jessop, and it reads like a dystopian novel, except that it's real, but it's still hard to believe. In her childhood, her dad got a revelation from the prophet to take on another wife, which added to their already large family. Mormon women are like baby machines and expected to bear as many children as possible. The more children, the more status and respect she has in the community. Caroline's plans to become a doctor were changed when her parents woke her up in the middle of the night after graduation from high school to tell her the prophet had received a revelation, telling her her new husband was to be a 50-year-old man with 3 wives named Jessop. And she was married to the man that weekend after only having been introduced to him the day before, and then she ended up joining his ready-made family of 3, now 4 wives and 30 children. These were just the ones still living at home. One fascinating aspect of the story is Jessop's favored wife, Barbara. She rules the hen house and reports on the other wives to the father. That's Meryl's title in the family. And when Caroline's new husband allows her to go to college to be a teacher, doctor was out of the question. It is because she would not be there all the time vying for Jessop's affections. In addition to being domineering and manipulative, Barbara was also jealous. We learn that most polygamous marriages contain rivalries and domination by a favored wife. The reality is most sister wives are not in harmony with fundamentalist Latter-day Saint values, or FLDS. They are always in conflict with one another over chores, their husband, the children, and social lives. When Caroline did go off to college, Jessop's 2 oldest daughters, still at home, went with her, not for the education so much, but as spies. The girls would report back to favored wife Barbara on any little discretion. When Caroline caught on to their scheme, it failed to rile her, so then the girls would make stuff up about her. Then when Caroline went home, she got lectured by Jessop for disobedience. Another fascinating thing about her story are the family dynamics concerning the other wives. One of them is out of favor and spends her days sleeping and nights watching TV. Another one is emotionally unstable and does weird stuff like prancing around and throwing dishes to get the devil out of them, and trying to take off all her clothes in the family van to nurse her baby. During this time, the new prophet, Warren Jeffs, has a revelation and gives Jessop 2 more wives that had previously belonged to his now deceased father, the former prophet. There was also an interesting story about the division in the community involving the apostles and the prophet's successors. Depending on which side a family was on in the divide, depending on where they sent their kids to school and which church building they met in, this feud lasted 7 years. Caroline was embarking on the establishment of a charter school shortly after graduation, and And this charter school had computer labs for the growing population of the children in the FLDS community. But how Jeff's decided that after his father died, Jeff's closed down the schools and then banned books from the outside and forbid anyone from getting a college degree. Then Caroline's husband told her she had to go and run one of his motels. He had hired a criminal with a background of rape and drugs that stalked Caroline, but he only said, Merrill, her husband, said that she was being disobedient and lazy whenever she complained about his stalking her. A neighbor who lived on the property caught up to the creep and held a gun to his head and said if he ever set foot near her again, he'd blow his head off. This guy that Merrill hired, this creep, and had never returned after that. But this was a turning point for Caroline. Among all the other abuse that she had gone through, she realized that this neighbor, who had a history of violence and mafia connections himself, cared more about her well-being than her husband, who recently took on a seventh wife. Then Caroline's sister wives, Barbara in particular, began being abusive to her and her 6 children. This was because they learned that Caroline was being unfaithful to Merrill, and by that, not being faithful meant not having sexual relations with Merrill. And she relented to protect herself and her children. Well, Caroline ended up getting pregnant again, and it was a really rough pregnancy. And the baby that she's breastfeeding, while she's going through this pregnancy, she finds out he has cancer. And when she tried to get him serious medical help, Merrill said their son's sickness was because of her disobedience. She got him medical help without his permission. And then she was always taught that the outside world, the people on the outside, were the evil ones. But now she's learning that it's just the other way around, that the people on the outside were the ones that were helping her, while her husband, Merrill, was, doing everything in his power to keep her from getting treatment for their son. After the terrorist attacks on 9/11, their new leader, Warren Jeffs, began talking about the upcoming apocalypse and the need to build a center. Construction on that began soon after, and it's the compound that you saw on the news that was from Texas, but Caroline had managed to escape before that. There was some other stories about another sister wife's sick son, and how Merrill had neglected him by refusing to pay for any of his treatments. And there was an accident involving another sister wife's son. He fell off his dirt bike and had internal injuries and was listed as critical, when this sister wife named Ruth, who had occasionally suffered from bouts of mental breakdowns, wanted to see her son in the hospital and sign a release form to allow doctors to perform surgery. Merrill told her not to worry, that he and Barbara, the head sister wife, would take care of it. Merrill never did make it to the hospital, but sent one of his other sons to go and visit him. He ended up staying overnight at the hospital because no one would pick him up. When Ruth pleaded to Merrill about going to see him, she was told she was being disobedient and lacking faith. She was told to pray for forgiveness if she wanted to make it to the celestial kingdom. In the meantime, Warren Jeffs was excommunicating young men and boys from the community, anyone that he deemed a threat to his, acquiring young wives for himself, or finding an excuse to excommunicate them. those boys and young men became known as the Lost Boys. You know, they were just ousted from the community, and then they had to fend for themselves. And a lot of times, when men were excommunicated, their wives were reassigned to other men that Warren Jeffs still favored. And Caroline's oldest daughter, when Caroline escaped with her 6 kids one night in a van, she reestablished herself and got a job, and her oldest daughter went back to the cult to live with her father. And Merrill Jessop, in another book I read about Warren Jeffs, he was excommunicated eventually too. Caroline's now ex-husband Merrill Jessop went with his remaining wives and children to the center that Jeffs had built called Yearning for Zion. And Merrill Jessop eventually, according to author Sam Brower, who did investigation on the FLDS community at this Yearning for Zion, Jessop eventually ended up getting excommunicated as well, right before, or I think it was during the time that Jeffs was going on trial for not only performing underage marriages, but you know, marrying young girls as young as 13 himself.